Today I want to look at class in the 21st century in Australia. Now it's interesting how we tend to hold on to ideas but adopt new technology. Now class analysis, whether it's a Marxist class analysis or any other type of class analysis, has basically been around since the 18th and 19th century. Obviously even before that period. In the last 2 centuries we've seen extraordinary progress, possibly progress, in technological innovations, which obviously have had a profound impact on us as individuals and communities and worldwide. And we tend to adopt new technology because in many regards this new technology saves us time. Irrespective of the damage we cause to the planet or where we live, we're happy to accept that damage as long as the new technological innovations improve our day-to-day lives. But when it comes to looking at ideas and changing philosophical and ideological momentum, we don't approach that task in the same way. And for many reasons, that explains why it's so difficult in the 21st century to understand what is going on around us. And that's the dilemma. What is going on around us? How can we explain it? Now obviously using a horse and carriage in preference to a car has its drawbacks. And obviously using a 19th century analysis regarding class has its own drawbacks and in many regards similar to the drawbacks that I talked about in comparing a horse-drawn carriage to a car. So let's get down to basics. What is class? It's basically a mechanism of dividing society. How do you divide society in a capitalist society? One based on private investment for private profit. So the rise of capitalism saw the rise of the Marxist class analysis and in its many variations. Before that, it was very easy to determine class. You had the rulers, the serfs, the church. Simple. Things are a little bit more complex. And for many decades, Marxist analysis has been falling over itself attempting to explain those changes. Upper class, upper middle class, lower middle class, working class, proletariat, lumpen proletariat. These are many of the words that are used to describe these divisions which are a direct consequence of a private investment for private profit economic system. So what is critical, essential, central to a capitalist society? The creation of profit, irrespective of the social, environmental, human harm it causes. Profit is the be-all and end-all of existence. Without profit, there are no corporations, there are no companies. So we have a situation in the 21st century where the role we play in society is basically dependent on disposable income. It's no longer dependent on what side of the sheet you were born on. It's no longer dependent on what side of the railway track you came from. Class in a 21st century community is determined by the amount of disposable income you have after you've paid your bills. And obviously this financial ball and chain, which most of us have, denotes to a significant degree our position in society and the amount of power that we wield. Now obviously, power and wealth are two different things, although one comes from the other. You can have institutional power, hereditary power, but class is essentially in a 21st century Australia based on the amount of disposable income you have. Now Australian society can be easily divided into four distinct classes. That's right, four. You have the 1% that own the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication, whose wealth has been magnified, tripled over the last few decades through the adoption of an economic system that enhances the fortunes of the few at the expense of the many. And this has occurred by rolling back the gains which were made during the 20th century by people struggling to improve their situation, the situation of family and friends and the people around them in society as a whole. So what are these four pillars of the 1% that hold the 1% above all of us, which give them extraordinary amount of disposable income, which allows them to buy things that they no longer have any need for in order to expand their empire? Well, privatisation, as we spoke last week, the fire sale of public assets to the private sector, mainly the corporate sector. Globalisation, trying to find the cheapest labour source you can find around the world. Corporatisation, the sidelining, marginalising and eventual destruction of small business. So most of the economy is in the hands of a shrinking number of corporations. And then you've got deregulation, removing all those laws which were put in place to protect people from exploitation, whether exploitation in society in general or exploitation in the workplace. Now we can no longer use terms like blue collar and white collar. They are totally irrelevant. What determines whether you're part of the 8% that have the disposable income to use this country's investment-friendly laws, whether it's negative gearing, shares, taxation laws, and the list goes on and on. The fact is that if you have disposable income at the end of the week, at the end of the month, at the end of the year, you can use that disposable income to extend your wealth. And when you have a parliament which is dominated by a private investment for private profit mantra, when you have the great majority of people in this country who still believe, and the key word is believe, that privatisation and corporatisation and globalisation and deregulation will lift them out of poverty, will cut the ball off the ball and chain, which is the financial ball and chain which is attached to their legs, then we know that aspiration has become a significant element of Australian society. To aspire to have enough wealth, to have disposable income, to be able to extend your wealth by exploiting other people's labour through investments. So about 8% of the country have enough disposable income to extend their wealth. This 8% I describe as the investment class. You've got the ruling class, which is the 1% that own the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication. Then behind them you have the investment class. Now people in the investment class will never achieve the heights of the 1%, but they will be able to enjoy the fruits of their investment. Now the investment class is no longer limited to professionals. Many professionals are not part of the investment class. It's not limited to white-collar workers. Most white-collar workers are not part of the investment class. There are blue-collar workers in the investment class. Some that run their own businesses, and other work as wage earners. So the investment class consists of a wide variety of people in Australian society who have one thing in common. At the end of the week, they have disposable income, which they can use to make their lives more bearable, more interesting, or which in the majority of cases is used to extend their wealth, to try to buttress their old age. So 8%, around 8% of the population are part of the investment class. And the investment class didn't fall out of the sky. It didn't come through aspiration, although aspiration is a critical part of the psychological makeup of people in the investment class. It came through legislation. Creating legislation through Parliament which benefited those who had disposable income. And you can be a white-collar worker, you can be a professional, you can be a blue-collar worker, you can be an investor. But the one thing that binds people together in this class is their ability to have disposable income. So class in terms of blue collar, white collar, upper middle class, lower middle class, is no longer relevant. The third group is the great bulk of people. And in this group you have professionals, you have blue collar workers, you have white collar workers, you have part-time workers, you have full-time workers, you have people who are self-employed in small businesses. What this large group, which is about 60 to 70% of the population have in common, about 60% of the population have in common is the fact that at the end of the week, maybe aside from having a holiday once a year, at the end of the week, there is nothing to invest. Everything that is earned, the great majority of what is earned, apart from a little bit which is put aside for a rainy day or for a holiday, or the children's education, is used to pay bills. And this is the 21st century working class. It's not related to the type of work you do, but related to the type of income you make and whether you have enough disposable income to invest in activities where your labour is no longer required, but by which you can actually increase your wealth. So you have the 1% that own the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication, The 8% that are part of the investment class, the around 60% who are part of the working class, not the traditional working class, but a working class which incorporates all types of work, including small businesses, who in the majority of cases are not there to make a fortune, cannot make a fortune because of the corporatisation, because the laws are directed in such a way as to assist corporations, not small business. And then you have about 32% of the population, about a third of the population, which rely on social security benefits to survive. That's right. People on New Start allowance, disability support pensions, old age pensions, single parents benefits. Everybody who finds themselves in a situation in this country where they are not able to work for a variety of reasons. And in Australian society, because of the past struggles, this particular section of the population isn't left to their own devices. A social security net has been created, in the majority of cases inadequate social security net, to ensure that this particular group doesn't starve, isn't homeless. Although obviously there are people who go hungry and there are people who are homeless in this particular group. Social security beneficiaries. Because the social security system is designed, one, to ensure people have access to the basic necessities who cannot obtain those basic necessities by being part of the private investment for private profit work situation. This group is an increasing group. It's a group that lives a hand-to-mouth existence, that finds it exceptionally difficult to respond to any crisis, is always at the cutting edge of any economic downturn. Increasing interest rates affects them. The goods and services tax affects them maximally. This is a group that lives a hand-to-mouth existence. So a good way of understanding Australian society, and theories are just about creating a mechanism by which we can understand what is happening around us. And if theories from the past gave us an insight into how 19th century and early 20th century societies worked, it doesn't mean that those theories will be relevant for all eternity. Theories need to change, ideologies need to change, and the definition of class needs to change. And it needs to change so we, as activists, can understand what is happening around us. And I'll go through the four main classes again. The 1% that own the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication. The 8% that are part of the investment class who have enough disposable income to invest in activities which will generate them a profit, although they're not using their labour to generate that profit in those investments. Then you have the great bulk of Australians, of around 60%, who are part of the wage system. They may be part of a wage system by being employed by a corporation, or they may be self-employed in small business. Then you have the 30% of Australians who rely on social security benefits to survive. I think that by using this analysis, you can make sense of the 21st century and the situation you and I and the rest of us find ourselves in this country at the end of the first quarter of the 21st century.